The corporate press doesn't want to talk very much about gain-of-function research, but we will not stop covering it here, especially on the heels of the Department of Energy's determination that there's a good probability the pandemic originated from a lab leak. Now, Philip Wegmann joins us. He is the White House reporter for Real Clear Politics, and he actually pressed the White House on that question this week and wrote about it for Real Clear Politics. We can put the story up on the screen. This is our first element. The White House told Philip that the Biden administration supports, quote, safe and secure gain-of-function research. Ryan over at The Intercept has been covering extensively whether gain-of-function research can ever be done safely and securely. Let's play the clip of Phil pushing the White House on this question.
Without weighing in one way or the other on origin of the virus, you've made clear that there's no consensus. Does the president believe, though, that the reward outweighs the risk when it comes to gain-of-function research?
Does the reward outweigh the risk when it comes to gain of
that type
I
of
got a
research is
history
proven?
degree. You're going to have to say that again?
Does the president believe that this type of gain-of-function research is proven?
He believes that it's important to help prevent future pandemics, which means he understands that there has to be legitimate scientific research into the sources or potential sources of pandemics so that we understand it, so that we can prevent them, and we can prevent them from happening, obviously. But he also believes, and this is why he wants the whole of government effort here to understand it, that research has to be done, and must be done, in a safe and secure manner and as transparent as possible to the rest of the world so people know what's going on.
All right, Philip, you also reported this out with interviews. You got quotes from Marco Rubio. We can put the third element up. You got quotes from Rand Paul. You've been talking to the White House about safe and secure gain-of-function research. What does that mean for how this could be affecting where money goes, where money is steered in this administration?
So even as there's more evidence coming out from the U.S. Energy Department and also the FBI that points in the direction of a potential lab leak scenario, the White House is agnostic on the origins of COVID. They say that there's no consensus, but meanwhile, they still believe that in some cases, gain-of-function research can be prudent. And the reason why I found this answer from Kirby so interesting is because it comes at a moment when the National Science Advisory Board has actually put forward new rules and regulations for how gain-of-function would be handled here in the United States. And essentially, those rules and regulations, they're sitting on the president's desk. We haven't heard from him yet, and Kirby's answer gives us the answer. Biden thinks that on occasion, it could be worthwhile.
And so it sounds like that means the new guidelines will probably be passed through, and then money will be steered in that direction.
Yeah, we'll see what the new rules actually entail. There's new regulations in terms of which type of labs can handle this sort of thing. There's reporting regulations. Currently, though, what's alarming is that there's generally a patchwork of regulations in this country when it comes to how labs handle this type of research. And that's one of the reasons why in 2014, the Obama administration, because of some concerns over avian flu, said, wait a minute, we're just going to have a moratorium on taxpayer funding for this sort of thing. 3 years later, it's the Trump administration that lifts that moratorium.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that 2014 ban, because that pause was implemented in the face of stiff opposition from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who argued publicly and privately that the pause was inappropriate and it would harm future pandemic prevention efforts. It's then lifted. Fauci was able to move money to this lab and to other gain-of-function research. So you have an entire set of officials, many of whom were there in 2014 when that, I think, correct decision was made. So do you ever talk to them about why it was the right decision in 2014 to pause gain-of-function research, and now it's the right decision to allow it? And in the interim, at minimum, we may have had a gain-of-function related pandemic produced by a lab doing that kind of work.
So what's fascinating about this is that you see a lot of the same names and organizations pop up again and again. In 2017, when Francis Collins, who is the acting director of NIH, lifts the moratorium, who does he thank? The National Science Advisory Board, who is putting together the new rules and regulations that are currently in the White House Office of Science and Technology. Oh, it's the same folks. And now that the moratorium, looks like it's going to be lifted, looks like there's going to be more money steered in this direction. even then, with increased rules and regulations that it seems the White House has signaled they're on board with, you still have some of these scientists saying, wait a minute, this is going to stand in the way of free inquiry. This is going to hurt our research efforts. We need this so that we can prevent the next outbreak. But the fundamental question here is, how much risk are we willing to take when it comes to this? Is it 10% chance, 5% chance of a once-in-a-century global pandemic, a 1% chance of killing more than 1 million Americans, if things get out of hand? And the answer that we got from the administration is that they think that this can be done safely, it can be done securely here in the United States. Of course, though, that's the United States. Our moves create a impetus for other nations with more lax regulation to go forward with their own.
And I think that's one of the most stunning revelations from the pandemic and looking into the origins of it is how Byzantine the system of U.S. dollar allocation is in other countries. As you say, it's a patchwork, but it's a patchwork in our country, let alone other countries. And so giving an okay to gain a function from the Biden administration, we like to say here, you have not earned reprieve from another pandemic. We have not earned time off from pandemics. This could happen again at any time. If the lab leak theory is correct, as the Department of Energy recently said was likely the case, they're in conjunction with the FBI, which we're going to get to in just a second. If you have that, that means that you haven't earned any time off from pandemics. This could potentially be happening any day, even though we feel like we've earned the time off from it. So what did Republican senators say when you took this question to them after getting that response from the administration?
Their critique is much of what you said. They are of the opinion that the White House doesn't earn any authority to sign off on new rules and regulations until they actually give a reasoned account for where the pandemic came from. Senator Marco Rubio tells me that the White House would have a lot more credibility on the question of regulation of gain
we
of
can
function.
put Marco Rubio's quote up there.
If they had been more forthright about where this came from. Obviously, Republicans they've made an assessment in their mind, and more or less at this point, Senate Republicans are saying that they want a complete and total moratorium on any funding to a university or institution that does this type of research.
To go back to the point that Kirby's making about the need to prevent future pandemics, because I think that's the most powerful argument on the other side of the question. But it always strikes me that the case of Wuhan, because let's imagine that the NIH is funding research in Wuhan in order to detect a pandemic early so that it could stop the spread of that pandemic. A pandemic can start anywhere in the world. It happened to start within just a few miles of this lab. And if they did not accidentally produce this pandemic, it happened right underneath their noses, walking distance from their lab, and they weren't able to prevent it. So if even in that scenario, that funding doesn't prevent a pandemic, how is it going to stop a pandemic if there's some natural origin somewhere else? And so I'm curious, when you're in the White House press room with other White House reporters, whether or not they see that contradiction, and they're concerned about, whether or not the White House is kind of slow walking into another one.
Ryan's getting a call from Eco Health Alliance right now. Peter Daszak just called Ryan.
Well, first of all, Ryan, it sounds a lot to me like you're questioning science, and that's not something that you should do. No, in all seriousness, look, one would expect that there would be more of a broad conversation about the prudence of doing this type of research. And that's why I actually really appreciate the straight answer to a straightforward question that Kirby gave me. He's laid out the administration's argument on that. And, because of that, people on both sides of this can either agree or disagree. But other than some of the really emotionally charged arguments that we've seen during the pandemic, no one has said, all right, let's actually take a moment and show why this does matter. Going back to that fundamental question of how much risk are we willing to accept, if this in fact did come from, that lab in Wuhan, then it would seem, all right, show me the counterfactual, show me the pandemics that perhaps you stopped or the illnesses that you somehow lessened. And I think that as a result of first the FBI analysis, now the Department of Energy, there is more of a willingness by the press to take these questions seriously. And frankly, your show has the receipts on this. A number of corporate media outlets, they said, all right, we have our narrative here. We're not straying from it. And, I think that that's a tremendous disservice, because some of the things that we've seen come out of reporting of The Intercept and BuzzFeed is that a lot of these scientists who said, this is naturally occurring in private, the authors of the Nature magazine letter, they were saying, well, it's a 50-50 chance whether or not it was the product of a lab.
And they were getting taxpayer dollars for making that discrepancy in public and private, which is just shameful in and of itself. Let's move on to a new interview that Bret Baier conducted with FBI Director Christopher Wray, where this came up. We can play the clip now.
Of energy study that says it's likely to have come from a lab leak, although the confidence is low. It cites the FBI. What is the determination by the FBI?
So, as you note, Brett, the FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan.
That aired on Tuesday night. Philip, do you have any sense, as you're talking to people in the White House, that there's tension between the FBI and the White House, which is continuing to use this line that there is no consensus, which is true. There is no consensus that it was a lab leak, despite the fact that there does seem to be a fact pattern in one direction. Is there tension between the White House and the FBI, the Department of Energy this week on this question, or are they sort of working together and dealing with it?
Yeah, I'm not certain why the Department of Energy decided to leak that report to the Wall Street Journal at this moment. Later during that same interview, Wray says flat out, though, that the Chinese are being less than helpful, less than forthright in their analysis of the initial situation. They're not helping investigators get to the bottom of this. And I think that is hugely significant, because the administration has said, we're not going to be able to really have a clear sense of where this started until the Chinese began cooperating. And when you used to press them on this question of, did the president actually bring this up personally with Xi? Did he press him to be more transparent? They wouldn't answer. What we heard from the White House just this week, though, is that Kirby said that President Biden actually pressed Xi personally when they were in Bali to be more transparent, to cooperate more. I think the fact of the matter is, though, we have a good sense of what the Chinese motivation is here, and they're probably not going to cooperate. And so I think that as the question remains open, I think that tension will also remain within the administration.
And as many of the researchers will tell you too, that the U.S. is still not being completely transparent about. There are still things, that the NIH is holding and other research laboratories are holding that could shed some light on it. Blaming China at this point does strike me as related to the timing. Do you think that this is just, all right, well, this whole balloon thing was embarrassing, and we're annoyed at the way that the Chinese did this, egg all over our face. We can't even find their balloons after we shot them down.
In the depths of Lake Huron.
It's like, let the Energy Department put their thing out there. Because it was in CNN, which, it was a CNN report that the Energy Department, right? And I read about it. I think pretty sure they had the scoop on that one.
I believe the Wall Street Journal is the one that got all of this. I think
the Journal got it first.
But the Journal got it first in what I've seen. But you're right. The political motivations here are obvious. Republicans are always going to want to tie bad things around the neck of Beijing. And the Biden administration, after they were humiliated with Balloon Gate, I think that they also, perhaps face the same temptation. We've seen a confluence of both Republican and Democratic concerns when it comes to China. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why what was verboten just a couple of years ago to talk about is now seen as, a very real possibility.
Well, and if there is a lab leak, let's just say that that's true, we're implicated in that. And the gain of function is implicated in that. And so it sounded to me like John Kirby didn't really want to answer the question that you asked. He did, though, to your point, he did ultimately give that answer. He said, basically it's a fancy way of saying, yes, we believe that gain of function can be done safely and securely. But they don't seem to really want to confront that head on.
Yeah, even before the pandemic, this was massively controversial among scientists and academics.
Right.
That this is going to be even more charged now that you have 1 million Americans dead as a result. I mean, that goes without saying.
And Chris Wray talked about that. And what's troublesome is how quickly the nonsense propaganda works its way into this and moving away from a genuine kind of intellectual exploration of how this happens, that we can prevent it from happening again. Chris Wray goes on to say in that clip, he says, and there was a Chinese military operation with and it ended up killing millions of Americans, as is the intent of that kind of an operation. So, some quote along those lines. It's like, so immediately going in this uber hawkish direction without asking the question of, okay, well, you're saying that this lab was a Chinese military operation with the intent of killing millions of Americans. Why was the U.S. funding it?
Right.
Like that,
Yeah,
that'd be kind of a basic follow-up question. Was it our intent then to kill millions of Americans?
Right, and even as more information has been released as a result of FOIAs, and we've been able to review some of these leaked emails, Dr. Anthony Fauci continues to stand by what he told lawmakers, which is the NIH has not ever funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Certainly, there's a lot of new information that counters that.
Because he's fudging the definition. Of
it's a definitional
the
thing,
definition. There's been a lot of games that have been played in the last couple of months and years. But I think that even before we get to the question of intent, of whether or not this was some science experiment that was designed to harm people, I think that we should be able to have a more basic conversation, which is, even in the best case scenario, is this prudent? And that's why I'm fascinated to see the answer that the Biden administration comes up with.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and the problem with kind of lying about this and suppressing an honest investigation into it is because then it does open the door for other people to then push it even further. Because now if you say, well, the FBI, Department of Energy, there's other intelligence agencies say it actually may have come from this lab, then you're going to have people even further out who are like, okay, well then I think it was actually intentional. And this was a bioweapons program, and it was released intentionally. And then the people don't have authority to come in and say, well, no, we were wrong the last 2 or 3 years about what we were saying, but now believe us when we tell you that we believe that this was an accident, which is my belief. I believe it was released accidentally. I don't see any evidence that it was done purposefully. But when there's no credibility left, it opens the door for people to believe that, and then might move us closer to some type of hostility with China.
And how many times do we have to relive this episode that we have during the pandemic, right? Obviously, all of our bias is towards more transparency, but when you are not forthright with the American public, and if you hedge, whether it's a noble lie or it's an insidious one, that creates space for individuals to assume the worst case scenario, to pump things up to more than they actually are. Right. And that is, the enemy of reasonable discourse, and it doesn't serve anyone well. That's why I think that, if you give a straight answer, even to a controversial question, that provides, the framework for an honest discussion rather than something that gets taken away by both the left and the right.
My last question is just in terms of the funding, whether it's domestically or internationally, because this is a point you made earlier to pick up on, the safe and secure designation that Kirby says we're able to make and do this safely and securely, gain-of-function research, but do it in a contained and responsible way. Would any of that involve foreign funding, still, diverting in this Byzantine way money to this grantee that then subcontracts this lab overseas? Are there safeguards for where this work can be done? In the Biden administration's opinion, does that involve keeping this domestic or banning foreign funding in any way? So
the new recommendations that are in front of the White House Office of Science and Technology, we're going to see which ones they actually sign off on and what makes the final cut. I'm absolutely interested to see whether or not there are any prohibitions on domestic versus international funding. Certainly, that Republicans are going to raise a stink over this based off of what we've been learning about EcoHealth potentially being used as an intermediary for some of this type of research. But I think that at the end of the day, there's going to be a strong incentive for the administration not to do anything that at all looks like it could contribute, again, to a potential once-in-a-century pandemic. I think that they are going to be much more cautious, not only when it comes to research here in this country, but certainly cautious about sending American dollars elsewhere. At least that's what I would hope.
Well, you can read Philip's story in Real Clear Politics. You can follow his work there as well. Philip Wegmann, White House reporter for RCP. Thank you so much for joining Counterpoints.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming by. See you in the White House press room. I've been there a while. I'm going to start coming back.
They're buds in the press room.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.